Mr. Speaker, I rise today where the public of St. Lucia, who had any doubts about the cowardness of the members on the opposite side, that would be proven today. The fact that the Deputy Prime Minister, who also happens to hold the portfolios, the member from Castries South, who also holds the portfolios of tourism, CIP, and Invest in Lucia, almost 50%, if not more, of the GDP. Both he and the minister from Castries Central, during the estimates, just to make a point, chose not to stand up and support the Minister of Finance's estimates. And here we are again, where very little has been said about his portfolio. And I'm being asked to debate this issue, this budget, this appropriations bill, of which I will. But I want it to be known for everyone who may have doubted it from before. The member from Castries South has to have me speak first, because the track record he has had in investment with the GPH deal, what he has done under the CIP program, Mr. Speaker, and the failures in tourism leads me to believe and should convince everyone he has nothing to say. And the only thing that he has to say is, once I have given and opined on these things, is to come back with some rhetorical. And isn't that the irony? That here it is that the opposition is going to present, right? And the government gets to rebut. But that's okay, because one can attempt to change the facts as much as possible, Mr. Speaker. But given that is the case, it means that the member has left me with the opportunity, sadly, to speculate, because I've waited for the facts to come out, and they have not. And therefore, I will interpret the numbers that have been presented and the evidence that's been presented, and interpret how I believe that those numbers should be interpreted. First of all, Mr. Speaker, speaker after speaker, and in particular, my very good friend from the Republic of Labrie, if I may refer to him so, the member from Labrie, continue to somehow make the period of COVID a time where the overall impact globally is being grossly underestimated. And that's why I went back, if you don't mind, Mr. Speaker, to the Economic and Social Review of 2020. And it starts off by saying that on page 1, Mr. Speaker, it says the COVID pandemic had an extraordinary adverse impact on the global economy in 2020, resulting in the closure of borders, national lockdowns, curfews, and imposition of restrictions on non-essential services to limit the spread of the virus. Global economic activity fell by unprecedented levels, particularly in the second quarter, causing a recession far greater than that of the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Global output is estimated to have contracted by 3.5% in 2020, compared to an expansion of 2.8% in 2019. The travel industry and other service sectors, which are contact intensive, were the hardest hit during the Great Lockdown, with a simultaneous health and economic crisis. Tourism-based economies and oil-exporting countries were the most acutely affected by this global shock. So I say that because there was no plan, there was no model that anybody could go and make reference to as to how to handle COVID. All we knew is come April of 2020, the world was shut down. cruise ships, airlines, staff were sent home. People were left not knowing how they were going to pay their debt. Nobody had a clue as to how this was going to impact us. And worse yet, all we kept on seeing as St. Lucians is images of what happened in China, and that happened in Italy, that happened in the UK, and that happened in the great city of New York. We saw hospitals overwhelmed. We saw containers being brought to hospitals to put dead bodies by the thousands. And we knew very little about COVID. Very little. And that is the environment that we were confronted with and having to put a plan. And I, for one, I'm very proud of the people of St. Lucia that under those trying circumstances stayed the course. And not only did we come through COVID, I think remarkably well. Sadly, in my humble opinion, way too many people died. But as we learned about COVID, COVID was specifically vulnerable to those persons with non-communicable diseases, persons with high blood pressure and diabetes, because COVID attacked your blood system and stopped the oxygen in your blood system. And we all already know that we have one of the highest rates per capita of both of those diseases. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to first of all deal with a couple of things that were brought up. HIA Airport. The old plan of HIA Airport, which I happened to be in cabinet when that came into fruition, was we were going to build a new terminal behind the old terminal. So where the car park is today is where the new terminal was going to go. And for those persons who may not have understood why that was the case, is because when you go to HIA and you see where the jumbo jets and the bigger planes park on the side, they park on the side because their tails, the planes are so long, become obstacles on the main runway. So for ICAO's standard, that's where they go. And so there was no way of building jetways under the existing terminal and to be able to facilitate those larger planes. So the decision was to build the new terminal in the back, and that plan called for the demolition of the existing airport. The saga that took place as to why the airport didn't get built. I'm going to use the Labour Party's slogan, could have, would have, applies also to the period of 2011 to 2016. Airport didn't start. So when we came in and we got to work by 2017, arrivals to St. Lucia were growing rapidly. And the decision was, if we had to go and continue that plan, that would be major congestion. We also had started discussions with the cruise lines from very early, in fact, from our inauguration in Vieux Fort, the FCCA were there, of having a home port facility in Vieux Fort. And we spoke about the idea that if we were to move the airport terminal to a different location, could we keep the old building and retrofit the old terminal specifically to handle the cruise ship passengers? Because if we go to Barbados and we go to Antigua and we go to some of the other countries, we see that on cruise ship days, particularly for home porting, that those passengers overwhelm your tourism days, your land-based tourism. So we wanted to segregate that. Not only that, but we have a problem because our airport is inefficient because we don't have a taxiway. taxiway meaning when a plane is going to go and take off, the planes actually have to wait in the tarmac until the plane takes off. So there isn't a parallel taxiway which allows planes to line up. And by moving the airport terminal where we were going to move it to, actually was going to reduce the length of the taxiway. So this idea that continues to repeat itself. One man made the decision. That's not how SLASPA works. SLASPA has a board. SLASPA has technicians. And all those recommendations come through that process. I still get a laugh, as do many other solutions, when the Prime Minister continues to say that he's never been to an airport that has 2 floors. So the fact is that the most valuable land at an airport, or the most valuable land is at an airport. So the old plans was to replicate what the old building was, where the arrivals and the departures would have been all on 1 floor, taking up lots of space. So the intention was to build 2 floors and reduce the amount of space that's required and give space for growth. Now, you can have the 2 floors, and you can have everybody coming to the ground floor, both your persons who are arriving and your persons who are departing. And therefore, persons who are going to be departing arrive on the ground floor, and they either have to take an escalator or an elevator up to the 2nd floor. Or you can do what most countries around the world have done, and it's to build a road that goes up. So departure passengers go to the top level, and arrival passengers go to the ground level. If you're going to go and pick up somebody, you go and pick them up downstairs. If you're dropping them up, you drop them upstairs. And doing that, we may not see the traffic now, but when you're building an airport that has 3 times the capacity of what we currently can cope with, there's going to become a point when you can do that. So, Mr. Speaker, the decision to not go with the government's PPP proposal was simple. They wanted $60 for 30 years. Not difficult to do the calculation. And regardless of how well we would have done, they would have been the beneficiary of that business. And that was an excessive amount of money given the cost of the building. Whereas having a lockbox of $35 set aside, getting concessionary loans from the Taiwanese, and part of the Taiwanese deal was that we use OECC, an established company that is private and public, and that had had experience not only in this region, but globally in building airports. And yes, they were picked jointly by the government of St. Lucia and by Taiwan. But they were brought in to oversee the management and the implementation of the project. So let's take the now infamous pile driving that the Prime Minister keeps making reference to. Where he gets these cost overrun numbers, I have no idea. I'm starting to assume that what he's saying is if we had stayed at the old site, there would have been 300 piles. But now that we've moved to the new site, it's 3,000. And somehow in his mind, that becomes cost overruns. I don't know, but that's for him to explain. That was put out to bid. That was put out to bid. And a company from the BVI won the bid. The Prime Minister said in his speech, and let me get it. Is it in 2020? No, not this one. In his budget address of 2023, Mr. Speaker, on page 59, he says, Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that the true cost of the HIA redevelopment project will only be determined after a competitive bidding process for the construction of the airport is undertaken. However, the chosen option, because of the size of the reduction, lends itself to cost reductions. He's 100% right. So a design of the building was done, of the main structure of the building, and that's what was put out to tender. And the bids came back, and the bids were higher than what was expected. Now the technicians, that's what they do. It's not uncommon for that to happen. The question is, why did it come in higher? Is it because there was a misinterpretation on the design? Was the quantities that were used were wrong? But all those numbers would have been written down, and the technicians and the three teams that we had overseeing HIA would have been able to come to a conclusion. But the Prime Minister preempted that, like he did with St. Jude's. Already had in his mind what he wanted to do politically. And if there's any person that used their individual influence on this issue, was the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance. Because the Minister of Finance has a significant role to play with SLASPA, because SLASPA has two ministers, the Minister of Infrastructure for day-to-day operations, and all finance matters go to him. I think it is a tragedy. I think it's a betrayal to the people of Taiwan, the way that this government has thrown OECC and the generosity of the people of Taiwan under the bus. Honestly. When I heard the managing director of SLASPA even want to say or suggest that they were terminated because they did something wrong, I felt that that really had gone past the pale. But it's for solutions, and many of them have. I've seen that OECS quietly left, no press conferences, left, and are now doing an airport project terminal in St. Kitts, and are doing a hospital project in St. Vincent. And life will go on. And meanwhile, we are here with no airport. No explanation by the Minister of Finance, no explanation by anybody how much it's costing us, no explanation as to how they're going to get out of the loans and what they're going to do and how much those loans have cost us. And again, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, and I'll come to it a little bit later, there is a requirement that Parliament be involved in the financial matters of this country. And there's nothing that's come to this House to speak about how much money this debacle has caused us. We can all see and estimate for ourselves the inconveniences that it's created, the destruction of confidence in our country by investors, because something like this that had already started 4 years later, still no sign of being started again. Every budget speech, we hear the same thing. We hear, let me give you the history of the HIA, and let me tell you the promise we have because we're committed to it. We heard the member from Ancillary Castries speak glowingly about how important an airport is and how important it is to have a plan in the South. Those are words, my brother, because we've not seen anything remotely close to action in the South. All we have seen is regression and pain in the South. The home port was critical. My colleague from Vieux-Fort South, who took us on a journey today, and I would say to you that, sir, your legacy is there for everybody to see for themselves. No need for me to opine on it, and I'm glad that you reminded some people of some of the things that you did, and I think you have every right to do so. But I have to say to you, sir, the same way that you offer me advice, I offer you advice, Mr. Speaker, is that I think that when you won in 1997, the first thing that you should have done is a cruise ship berth in Vieux-Fort. If you wanted something to have really transformed Vieux-Fort. And in 1997, the taxi drivers were already feeling the pain because the Southern Taxi Association was growing. People were bastardizing that exclusivity that they had, but there was nothing else other than taking people up north to the hotels. And by putting a cruise ship terminal in the South, would have allowed attractions to grow, would have allowed the persons in the South to been even more engaged in the tourism sector. It would have supported our cargo port, and I can't even believe as to how much further advanced we would have been had we done that. And the same way that Sir John had the foresight of doing Point Seraphin back in 1981, I think that that would have been a legacy that would have been long-standing for you and for the Labour Party had they done that. And I still want to say that for the United Workers' Party, that is still very clear an ambition, because we do not believe that this country can grow to the extent it should with one cruise ship port. Castries is overcrowded. And with the new hotels coming up north, it's going to get even more congested. And even with the promise of fixing up the Castries to Gros Islet Highway, it still can't handle that capacity. So diverting some of the ships to the south will help Labrie, will help Choiseul, clearly will help the two Mikus and Denry. And I think that there's much more opportunity for attractions. And one thing that the cruise ships, the large ones, cannot do is replicate the kind of tours that St. Lucia has. And that's always going to make St. Lucia a marquee destination. Which brings me to Castries. I had a member from Castries Central being supported by the member of Castries South, commending him on the second phase of the Castries market. If I remember that was a vision that we clearly had, a design that was done by Mr. Poyot, multiple trips abroad, particularly to Borough's Market, if you want to know where the model came from. You finished the idea, so I can't even say you stole it. The fact is that there's actually the first phase of the development, which was to fix up for the vendors in the back. And I know that there were members, even in my own party, that felt I should have done the front part first. But I strongly felt that it was important to respect those vendors in the back. And you know, we go back there now, and it's hard to believe what it was back in 2017. The conditions in which those vendors were operating under. On the floor, and every time it rained. The conditions of the bathrooms that were there. So I was so happy to see and their faces when we opened it up, where they were undercover, we'd raised the floor, and in particular, the bathroom. And then the second phase was the container park. And then the third phase is the main building itself. And the goal, and I'm on record for saying it repeatedly, was for the Castries market to become the #1 tourism attraction in St. Lucia. If you wanted to taste St. Lucia, if you wanted to listen to St. Lucia, if you wanted to experience St. Lucia's creativity, that is where it was supposed to be on display. And this idea that we're bringing in t-shirts with designs from overseas, from Miami, jewelry from the Middle East, and not integrating Export St. Lucia, which is what we were doing, into building now small businesses, creative businesses, and to give them now a permanent place to display their products. And the idea of developing franchises. All those made it up. And I was so happy when the member from Ansary Cannery spoke about a hospital. So it's not just about the building. It's about the people. It's about the persons who work there. That's what makes it. In the Castries market, you know, Mr. Poyet, I think, is a genius in terms of his recreation of our architecture and modernizing it, but keeping the touches. Just for St. Lucians to know, he's the same one who did the bus shelter in Soufriere and has done multiple buildings in St. Lucia, the Derek Walcott home on the Chaussee. He's a genius. And so with his architecture, putting permanent facilities that are world class, developing the skill sets and creating business opportunities, and whether it's the youth economy or whether it's boosts, the concept is the same. Put money into young people's hands or persons who have retired and now want to own their own businesses, and let them become entrepreneurs, because it's that creativity that adds value to our economy. We then had the halls of justice. And I have to, sorry to say, laughing every time I hear the Prime Minister say, nobody wanted to have a police station next to the courthouse. What rubbish. What nonsense. How does having a police headquarters next to a courthouse even come close to saying that it's treading on the independence of the court and the police? Absurd. And even this $4.5 million you've gone and spent now, which we still haven't even opened, you're promising to opening up this month. And we can all see it. Has that added any value to Castries? So what was the goal? The goal was for that to be underground. So when the prisoners came from Bordelais or prisoners were sent there, it was underground. So the buses would have bring them in, contained, secure. And then there would have been a tunnel from the custody suites underground to the court. So you don't have to bring the prisoners outside and go through the security risks that we create right now. And that is exactly what is happening in New Zealand, is happening in Australia, is happening in England, is becoming now the preferred standard. Laugh as you want to laugh. And then you save significant amount of money when it comes to security of your courthouse. And unlike this government, we were not putting all the courthouses there. We were putting 6. 3 high courts and 3 criminal courts. Why do you want to have one building and all those courts? I see somebody in the House, Mr. Speaker, who tried to prevent planes from taking off. Who's to say he can't make a phone call and do the same thing for the courthouse and the whole town comes to a grinding halt with a bomb scare? Why would you want to have families going to a building in which they are criminal courts? Why don't you keep them separate? And now the Minister of Finance wants to come to this House after publications have been made to do a compulsory acquisition for the buildings and tell us that there's now a private agreement to purchase the property for $14 million. Property that we know is valued at over $40 million. We all know that if you publish the second acquisition, you've acquired it. It belongs to the state. And there's a process to settle that. But even the idea of $14 million, when you have land by where the police headquarters are, you also have land up by where the old Golden Hope was. Yeah, the government has land all over the place. You're going to go and buy land? And you want to come now and convince the public and the church that moving the building on the other side of the street is going to have any less structural threat to the cathedral? I know that solutions are much wiser than that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the GPH deal speaks for itself. What is it that GPH is going to do? I don't think that there's one solution who can articulate and tell us how much any project is going to cost and what the projects are. And when we hear about a vendor's arcade, we ask ourselves, what is it? The government of St. Lucia, the people of St. Lucia could not build a vendor's arcade? SLASPA couldn't do that? SLASPA couldn't fix up the Banans area? It was the St. Lucia Soufriere Development Foundation that built the dock in Soufriere. And what makes this deal more egregious is that there was no tendering. And then to find out, not by the government saying so, but having to find out through a press statement that the head tax, which was at $6.50 forever, had now been increased to $12. And that GPH was going to get 10. So you knew that you were going to increase the head tax. So imagine what SLASPA could have done with that. So you've given them over $440 million US dollars over the next 40 years for $40 million of work. But that seems to be the ratio that this government now has become accustomed to. That anybody is going to lend you money or make an investment, the government of St. Lucia is going to allow them more than 100% return on that investment and tell us about how difficult things are. SLASPA has never defaulted on a loan, ever. Never defaulted on a loan. Mr. Speaker, the member from Dennery North spoke about solid waste in the South. So when we came into government, the site in the South had already expired, and we were continuing it. And there was more and more pressure, not just by DSH, but more importantly by SLASPA, to close down that site. And up until that point, no new site had been found in the South. Everywhere you go to, everybody in the South suffers from what we call the NIMBY complex. Not in my backyard. Nobody wants the solid waste done. Everybody wants it to be picked up, but nobody wants to dump near them. And as population is growing in the South, need for recreational space, need for commercial space, need for residential space, nobody wants that in their backyard. And yes, when we were doing a special project and there was a company from Malaysia that was working with us and took us on a trip to show what other countries were doing and the incinerator and how does the incinerator work. Because what the member made reference to, but is still not offering any solution, and I hope I'm not misquoting him, he said $75,000 a month in transportation to bring the trucks, to bring it to Deglo. And that's the most expensive part. So the purpose of the incinerators was to have the incinerators in multiple sites around St. Lucia to reduce the amount of traffic and to reduce the need for a landfill site. So it worked in Malaysia. Why is it not working in St. Lucia? And what attempts have been made to make sure it works? Because that is standard technology. Incinerators are not anything new. Not like going to the moon. So there was no alternative site. The landfill had come to its end of its life. And we had a proven incinerator strategy that had worked somewhere else. And then the minister is now telling us that he's outraged at the $75,000 a month that are having to be paid. So I want to ask the minister, why are you not equally outraged by the $800,000 a month that NLA is having to pay for the $80 million loan? Why are you not outraged by the $8 billion that has gone away through CIP? Why are you not outraged with what is happening in housing and the cemeteries and the giving away of the Bonanza land? Why are you not outraged by the cost of the halls of justice and what's taking place? Why are you not outraged because the brand St. Lucia wants to go and build a 7-story building costing everybody money, and meanwhile you have 88,000 square feet of space empty at the Darien Mall at $4 a square foot? You could do that tomorrow. And then you turn around, you want to be righteous on us? When you used to come to this house in opposition and talk about the bananas, the bananas, the bananas, the bananas. The fact is, in 2019, bananas were at $18 million. And yes, we were exporting to the UK. And yes, we were trying to get into the French market. And we've explained multiple times why we could not make it. But it wasn't said it was from short of trying. And because there are bananas in Martinique still going. And so there's still an opportunity. But no, you're not outraged at that anymore. You want to come and talk about that agriculture has grown by a couple of percentage points and your people are happier? $18 million to $3 million. $15 million less in banana revenue. That is going to whom? To small families in the rural area that help supplement their income. There's no nobody's outraged. We just want to give excuses. Well, we're trying, we're getting this, we're doing that. But the fact is, could have, would have. And then when the same minister wants to come and talk to me about a healthcare center, the healthcare center burnt down, my brother, when you were in office in 2015. If it was so important to you, why did you not reopen it? You want to come and blame us? The fact is that there was a health plan. And the fact is that that facility was grossly underutilized. But if you want to go and make that decision, and as the rep, that's your prerogative. But don't come and blame other people for that. Laptops and software. So we're enemies of the state again because we brought in a technology to put all of the books on tablets, and that people have to pay $250 a year in license fee versus $1,000 a year in books. And that anytime there are any addition changes, it's made automatically. Now, if you have been able to find software or design software to replace it, then you replace it. But to abandon that concept of getting kids to learn on the same tools that they're going to be working with when they get into a mainstream office, and to give them an empty laptop and want to convince everybody that you've done something great, I know that he's a better person than that. I know that he's a better person than that. But it just tells me that protecting the victory is absolutely more important than the development needs of this country. So don't speak righteously as if you are going to call everybody else out, because you don't and you have not. Now, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to spend some time, Mr. Speaker, on talking about the $2 billion budget and whether we're better off. The fact is that we are paying $300 million more in taxes. That's the reality. Whether you want to say the budget has grown and it's because of GDP and it's proportional amount, in absolute terms, people are paying $300 million more a year in taxes today than they were before. That's over $3,500 per working person in this country. And the excise tax is what? You said there's no new taxes? The new tax is the fact that you've artificially kept the gas price high again at $16.50. The evidence is there to speak for itself. Why is it every other country is at $12 and $13? That's a tax. And when you allowed the gas tax, the gas price to go above $13.95, it triggered a whole bunch of events. It caused the price of bread to go up. It caused the bus fares to go up. And guess what? Even when you bring the price now down, the price of bread is not going to come down. The price of bus fares are not going to come down. And the damage is being done. The 2.5% is a compounding tax. When the member wants to talk to you about that inflation in taxes, well, the numbers are there. When you go to the economic review and you take the first graph, and it shows you agriculture, economic output. $8.5 million less than in 2019. Mining down $2 million. Manufacturing is up 16 million. And it's interesting with that because it says that alcohol is up almost $200 million. And when I check with the two alcoholic companies, they have no idea where that number came from. But I take it for face value. Electricity is up $15 million. Water is up $15 million. Construction is up $112 million. Transportation is up $16 million. Financial services is down $97 million. That makes sense. Some of the banks have left the market. The largest impact on the GDP, taxes, $316 million more. Everywhere you read in the economic review, this one. In tourism, in the stayover segment of the sector, despite lower average length of stay, So people stayed in St. Lucia for a shorter period of time. And higher hotel rates. And then when you go to the macro numbers, the number of paid bed nights is down. Tourism arrivals, stayover arrivals in this country have only grown by 2.5% in 5 years. That's 0.5% per year. And the US arrivals have grown by 30. And the 30% growth in US arrivals did not happen by accident. It was because the same COVID period, it was the same United Workers' Party that believed that we could do something special. And that special was to reopen the market in June of 2020. And what did that do, Mr. Speaker? How many places could Americans fly to internationally in June of 2020 or for the remaining of the 2020? 5 or 6. So every single American who wanted to travel internationally would find out St. Lucia. And that St. Lucia name became a household name in the States. And as a result of that, we got American Airlines to put on flights from Dallas. Gone. American Airlines put on flights from Chicago. Gone. So imagine how much further we could have been if this government, when they came in, continued to do the many things we were doing, i.e. spending money on advertising. They've cut all the advertising. Going back to the old days of travel agents. But when you bring novices to come and run the most important industry, and when you have people at the top who don't understand, have a policy, don't have any creativity, don't understand the industry, that's what you're going to get. And we're on a significant decline in that area. Mr. Speaker, are we better in health care? So you've paid $300 million more in taxes. Do any of us believe that the health care is better in this country? Well, the Medical and Dental Association said no. Are your roads better? Is national security better? In 2019, there were 46 homicides. Last year, there were 78. Do people feel safer? There's nowhere that you can see that life is better in St. Lucia. And the best way to describe it is if your taxes have gone up, and if the cost of living has gone up for people, bus fares, bread, kerosene, cooking gas, basic items. When the member talks about deflation, Minister, you should go and read your own report and get into the detail. And see what it says. After increasing by 5.6% and 3.9% in 2022 to 23 respectively, food and non-alcoholic beverages, which is the primary basket, declined by 1.3% in 2024, largely affecting imported price trends. Imported price trends. Not with anything you did, no policy that you had. That was because of what was taking place in the world. And there were mixed movements in various items. The most notable declines were recorded for processed fish and seafood by 6.7%. Mineral water came down by 15%. Butter came down by 57%. Poultry by 6.3%, and beef by 16.4%, and other bakery products by 7.2%. Cheese by 23%, and coffee and tea and cocoa by 5.6%. However, these decreases were partly offset by increases in the average price of fruit and vegetables, juice by 19.3%.
Member from Mico South, you have 15 minutes left.
Fruits by 9.7%, vegetables by 3.8%, and eggs by 13.5%. The prices are up where it matters most.
Member for Swazel, Saltibus.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a second stab at the pie and invoke and ask for suspension 32.8 and invoke section 32.10 to provide the Leader of the Opposition an additional 15 minutes.
15?
15.
Honourable members, the question is that Standing Order 32.8 be suspended and 32.10 be invoked to allow the member from Mico South and Leader of the Opposition an additional 15 minutes in which to complete his presentation. And now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Please proceed, member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When we go to get services in this country, has it gotten better? Has it gotten easier to get a passport? Has it gotten easier to get a driver's license? Do you find that government services have improved based on the fact that you're paying $300 million more in taxes? When you want to make a comparison between today and 2019, you cannot be flying at 35,000 feet. You need to get on the ground in a bus and speak to the people. The numbers are not lying. The fact is that people are paying more taxes, cost of living has gone up, and more importantly, wages have not gone up. You do the math. You do the math. And then now, we have a report where the government is boasting about unemployment at 10.8%. And I've listened to the attempt to try to salvage that claim. But the report is here. And it says, the labor force, which comprises the employed labor force and the unemployed, averaged 109,160 in the review period. This outcome was 3.6% lower than the size of the labor force of 113,246. 4,000 people. The lower participation rate was indicative of a larger number of persons opting out of participating in the labor market. Opting out. That's not retiring. That's not finding other jobs. And the reason for that is because they continue to perpetuate a lie. And they want to make a comparison between this year and previous years. When there was a report in 2022 Social Economic Review that said they changed the formula, and that once a person stops looking for a job after 10 weeks, they've opted out. But meanwhile, we have a Minister of Labor that no matter how many times you ask her or her ministry, who is giving the work permits to the Indian workers at St. Jude's? Over 300. Who's giving the work permits to the Chinese people at Galaxy? Why do we need them? What conditions are they working under? Are they paying taxes? Nothing? The people of St. Lucia are not deserving of an answer? That's just considered to be political nuisance? Do you know how vexing it must be for somebody who's been looking for a job and to see foreigners working in a job that he or she thinks that they can do? Push a wheelbarrow, lay blocks, mix sand and cement. That's now beyond St. Lucians. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable. And that is why life was better in 2019 than it is today. Sports facilities. We spent $33 million and that money came from where? That money came from the Taiwanese as grant money. Lockerbie got $2.5 million in consultancy fees. The rest of the money was spent on the Sufra Mini Stadium with lights and a track that still has not been certified. Still has not been certified, but we're celebrating 2 gold medals at the Carifta and 2 medals at the Olympics, and it's still not certified. And the same person who did all the sporting facilities in Jamaica, Lockerbie, he's an enemy of the state because he worked on the United Workers' Party. But $80 million, and up until even today, the Minister of Sports can't tell us how much money has he spent. How much money has he spent at Darren? If he does not want us to speculate, say how much you've spent. Tell us where the money is. Were the contracts put out to bid? Who got the contracts? We have to be begging for information, and then meanwhile, we're left to repay the loan, and the loan is $800,000 a month from the NLA. And the minister made a statement about what took place with Cage. I'm asking him through you, Mr. Prime Minister, to retract that statement, because he does not want us to go there. And I'd like him to produce any document that shows the cabinet approved anything like that, because he knows it's not true. So I'm asking through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Prime Minister, please have him correct that statement. Because if he does not correct that statement, then I will have to correct it for him.
Which one is that number?
Mr. Speaker, he made a statement that we agreed, he said the board agreed, if I'm not mistaken, to reduce the commission that was being paid to Cage and to give Cage excessive amount of concessions. And that was the reason why he gave to my colleague as to why the $1.8 million was being allocated to the NLA in the budget. I mean, if I remember it correctly when you said I'm not allowing you to speak about the...
You do recall the minister making a document of the House, the contract between Cage and whether the board or the government. There is a document of the House to that effect.
I'd love to see it.
Sure, okay.
If it's a document of the House, I'd love to see it, because he's made allegations it was my government during my government's
When
tenure.
he first made the allegation, he didn't make the document a document of the House. So we'll get it.
I won't go into the details now, Mr. Speaker, but when the time comes, if necessary, I will.
Sure.
So, Mr. Speaker, the economy has grown by 35%, but when we look at where the growth came from, the growth came, and it's repeatedly said in the Social and Economic Review, price increases, continual price increases, the price of products and taxation. That is what's driven this economy, because the most important thing, Mr. Speaker, in determining whether in fact that there's any growth in your economy, very simple. Very simple. Go and look at electricity consumption, go and look at water consumption, go and look at gas consumption on the roads. No change. No change. So when value goes up on two things. It goes up on volume and it goes up on price. And the vast majority of growth has come through price, not volume. It's not volume in tourism. It's certainly not volume in agriculture. It's not volume in manufacturing. It's not volume in consumption of electricity. It's not volume in consumption of water. It's not. There was 20% increase in cars, and yet the consumption of gas is 2%. Mr. Speaker, let me make the point. Let me make the point, Mr. Speaker. Will you find it for me where the showed the price, the energy, the gas prices? So, Mr. Speaker, I'll get the graph. Mr. Speaker, the UK now have imposed a visa waiver system on us. The Europeans now are meeting to do the same thing to us, because of how this government is managing the affairs of the CIP. That's exactly what is going on. Under our administration, the Canadians who had a visa restriction put in a waiver. Despite the decline in imported refined product prices, the domestic retail price of gasoline and diesel at the pump remained unchanged in 2024. Retail prices stood at $16.50 per imperial gallon. April 2023 for gasoline, October 23 for diesel, resulting in higher excise tax rates. How do you want to tell us there's no increase in taxes? When the price of fuel is dropping globally and you maintain the price higher, that's increasing taxes. However, when compared to 2023, the annual average price of gasoline fell marginally to 0.7%, or 12 cents per imperial gallon, while for diesel, 0.4%. Consequently, excise tax rose from both gasoline and diesel, averaging $4.17 and $4.74, which is above the $2.50 and the $1.50. Want to constantly come here and talk about that you care, that you understand economics? We told you from the beginning, to fight inflation, you've got to reduce the duties. You've got to reduce taxes. The amount of money that the government is going to earn is going to be the same. But the $300 million came from where? Came from excise tax and came from international trade, which means the duties. And it was the price that drove that tax revenue, not volume. Not volume. Price. You did nothing. And now you have a problem on your hands, Mr. Minister of Finance, through you, Mr. Speaker. You have a major recession coming in the world. And that recession is going to require you to look at your export markets and how you're going to allow them to be competitive. And so what you would not do for the people, and let's not forget, you had a businessman who came to you in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, and said he could not do the investment in St. Lucia because the tax was too high, a 2.5% tax. Now, I'd have thought that that's when Cabinet and the Minister of Finance would have said, you know what, there's a problem. If this big business person can't do this investment because of this, let me take it off for everybody. No, he waived it for that investor only and continued to ask the people in St. Lucia to make a sacrifice, and up to today wants to continue to convince us the money is going into health and security, when he's already admitted that the money was there for revenue to pay for the $200 million in loans that he took. That's what it was there for, because nobody's seen any improvement in health. You go to the healthcare centers, you can't get medicine. You have people waiting in the emergency area. You have the MDAs who said the medical and dental system, it's never been worse than it is now. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to get on to a very important issue. The Constitution of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have, Mr. Speaker?
17 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the Constitution, Section 77, says all revenues or other monies raised or received by St. Lucia, not being revenues or other monies that are payable by or under any law from the time being in force in St. Lucia into some other fund established for a specific purpose, shall be paid into the form of the consolidation fund. No monies shall be withdrawn from the consolidation fund except to meet expenditure that is charged upon the fund by this Constitution or by any law enacted by Parliament, where the issue of those monies has been authorized by an appropriation law or by a law made in pursuance of Section 80 of this Constitution. So in essence, Mr. Speaker, what it's saying is that the process we've just gone through, which is the estimates and now the appropriations bill, the power of that is in the Constitution. And it's to keep a record of all revenues and all expenses that we have in this country. Cabinet has the authority to make a plan, but like what we're doing today, Parliament has to give it approval. And once it's approved by Parliament, it cannot be changed unless you're going to do what's it called, a supplementary budget. Mr. Speaker, I say that, and again, that is how I am compromised. Because the Prime Minister, in his budget last year, 2023, budget speech, 2024. Where is it? 2024. 2024 budget speech. No, right. No, that's what.
Remember, you have 15 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, that's the economic review. Mr. Speaker, in his speech, budget address, where is it? He spoke about the CIP. And what he said, Mr. Speaker, was specifically last year, he spoke about, see if we can find it. He spoke about the infrastructure program. And that a new novel approach was coming up, Mr. Speaker, and there would be a bonanza, in essence, and I'm paraphrasing, Mr. Speaker, of benefits that we would be obtaining because of that. 2024. Anyway, he'd made mention very specifically, Mr. Speaker, about the CIP program. Here it is. Mr. Speaker, you may have heard about the commotion surrounding the signing of a memorandum of agreement by the Caribbean MOA. Our commitment to the regional cooperation and collaboration is genuine. We have just signed contracts that will significantly enhance our infrastructure, including roads, housing, and community facilities. These contracts, which require developers to secure financing for execution in advance of recouping their expenditure, were based on arrangements that predicated the signing of the MOA. We cannot in good conscience change these contractual arrangements in any fundamental matter, Mr. Speaker. The islands that have signed the agreement have been able to build roads, houses, community centers, and reduce their public debts from their CIP. And I'm pleased that they were able to do so, but we are at last to have adopted the program and have benefited at last. Mr. Speaker, I went and read his comments, nothing. CIP is in crisis. It's in a free fall. All things are happening outside. And not a word. Not a word, Mr. Speaker. We just heard the Minister of Investment and CIP at a press conference announce that the infrastructure program has been suspended. He also said that the contracts with Galaxy and BMAX, Mr. Speaker, have been terminated. And he also said, Mr. Speaker, that there were 3,000 families who applied for citizenship under the infrastructure program, Mr. Speaker. 3,000. Those persons, I presumed, have already paid Galaxy because we saw the contract out in the public market, and I won't make any reference to the contract, other than to say that it's in the contract. So they got paid. They paid Galaxy already. They've paid the lawyers. They paid the $8,000 US for the due diligence fees. And according to the minister, that their applications are pending and no approval for their citizenship has been given. We also know that a document has been made public, which is correspondence between the CIP unit, Mr. Speaker, and Galaxy, in which Galaxy was being asked to amend their agreement on the basis of the MOA. And Galaxy wrote back and said, there's no need to amend, because when we signed the contract, it had already contemplated the MOA. And as a result of that, because the prices went from $100,000 for citizenship to $250,000, the 6,000 files that they now have, Mr. Speaker, are not worth $600 million anymore, Mr. Speaker, but they're now worth 1.5 billion US dollars. And Galaxy said that, look, this was a quid pro quo. I agreed to fund you $100 million, and you agreed to reimburse me 6,000 files. Now, Mr. Speaker, as a parliamentarian, I'm asking the question, who gave the illegal opinion that the minister apparently signed the contract to borrow $100 million US and agreed to pay them back 6,000 files? And if there's some reason why it didn't come to Parliament in the first place, I would have thought at this point the minister, the Prime Minister that is, as the Minister of Finance, would have alerted us that there's potentially going to be a major lawsuit in which St. Lucia is going to be obligated. Now, it's very similar to Greinberg. Greinberg, a lease was given to him, and when we tried to take away the lease from him, he took the government to court, Mr. Speaker. Now, in the case of Greinberg, the value of his lawsuit was fabricated because nobody knew, Mr. Speaker, whether we had oil. Nobody knew how much the oil was worth. So to go to the courts and convince them that I need to be reimbursed for what I'm lost, that would have been a very difficult argument, Mr. Speaker. But in this particular case, the documentation that is out there says the contract with Galaxy is worth $1.5 billion. And the government now has agreed to terminate the contract. And Galaxy says we have no right to terminate the contract. So the question is, what's the exposure to the state? And is there an obligation based on the Constitution, based on the Finance Act, that some kind of provision is identified, or at least the Minister of Finance would have alerted us that there's a problem coming? We don't know, Mr. Speaker. We're being left in the dark. We have a hotel, Mr. Speaker, that was given 6,000 files, $1.5 billion again, US. Anybody can go to the property. Well, they used to be able to go to the property. Now they're stopping even the horsemen from going to the property. They're stopping people from accessing the beach. But no work has gone on. Is that another potential lawsuit coming? Is the government going to terminate that contract? Where is that going to leave us? Because in the letter, Galaxy seemed pretty confident that they had all their bases covered. And the question is, has any work been done with that money, Mr. Speaker? That's an important question, because if work has been done, it means that the contract has been implemented, which makes it even worse. So I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker. Has Parliament been circumvented? Has any opinion been given? Is there something that we should be all worried about, Mr. Speaker, in moving forward, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, when we talk about debt in this country, Mr. Speaker, and mismanagement of the economy, and I'm sorry that my colleague from Labrie is not here. And if I can ask you, Mr. Speaker, to go to page 127 of the Social and Economic Review. Mr. Speaker, I've repeatedly heard in the House by the Prime Minister and by some of his other colleagues that running a current account surplus and running a primary surplus are indications of a great minister of finance. In fact, the member is boasting because we have here on that page that the primary balance was a surplus in 2022-23. It was a surplus in 23-24, and they're projecting a surplus in 24-25. So two consecutive years, and they're projecting a surplus for next year. They have a current account surplus for 1 year, negative for the 2 years and 1 year. And they're boasting unprecedented, great job, fantastic, unbelievable. Well, we just got to go to this.
5 minutes left.
Got to go back to the same graph, Mr. Speaker. 2016, 2017, 91 million surplus current. 2017, 2018, 75 million surplus. 2018, 2019, 103 surplus. Primary, 78 million, 50 million, 108 million. 3 consecutive years of massive surpluses, Mr. Speaker. So what does that say? What's that say? That something is wrong? That somehow we left the economy in a disastrous shape? Before going into COVID, we ran 3 consecutive years of significant current account balances and parent balances. And the overall balances were minimal. Now, how does that translate, Mr. Speaker? Because the member from Labrie spoke about debt and debt to GDP. And the fact is the debt to GDP increased in 2020 because the GDP itself, Mr. Speaker, contracted by 20%. 24, great. So it went up to, the debt to GDP went up to 92%. And then now, the next year you grew by 12, the next year you grew by 20. And you started getting back to your original GDP and then started to exceed it. But here's the story, Mr. Speaker, because he said something, it's about debt. So between 2016 and 2019, Mr. Speaker, with those current account balances and primary balances and overall deficits, in 4 years, my administration added to the debt $416 million. $104 million a year. In 2020 to 2021, which is the peak of the COVID, Mr. Speaker, $718 million was added to the debt in those 2 years, which is $360 million per year. And then now, 2022 to 2024, 3 years, this government has added $973 million to the debt stock. $324 million a year. And that's in addition to the taxes that they got. And that's in addition to all the money they got from CIP that they've been using to pay debts, adding to the CDP program. Where's the money, Mr. Speaker? Our lives should be so much better if in fact that those numbers were correct. But when you want to come now, these are the numbers from the book itself. And I'm going to repeat it. Between 2016 and 2019, we ran 4 years consecutively of current account surpluses and primary surpluses. 4 years. Minimal overall deficits. And we added $416 million to the debt stock, Mr. Speaker. $104 million a year. During COVID, the 2 years, $718 million. And remember, Mr. Speaker, the money that we borrowed during COVID was concessional money, 40 years, 10-year moratorium at a 0.5% rate. That's the money that we got from the IMF and from the World Bank and from CDB and from the ECCB. Today, your prime years that you're boasting about, great finance management, you have
Member, you have a minute.
$973 million. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to end on this note, Mr. Speaker. A man who lies to himself and believes his own lies becomes unable to recognize the truth, either in himself or in anyone else. And he ends up losing respect for himself and for others. When he has no respect for anyone, he can no longer love, and in him he yields to this impulses, indulges in the lowest form of pleasure, and behaves in the end like an animal in satisfying his vices. And it all comes from lying to others and to yourself. Mr. Speaker, this is exactly what I'm seeing with this government. They're sitting in this house, laughing, parading, ridiculing, arrogance, saying all kinds of things about other people, but in fact, these things are really about themselves. But there's one truth, Mr. Speaker, is the truth that people know every day when they live it. And people know that they're paying more taxes. People know that the cost of living has gone up. People know that their salaries have not gone up. People know that they're struggling. And people know for sure that this government is void of any ideas. In fact, a person from my constituency, when he heard the promises from the Prime Minister, he said that this was just disco lights. And it's intended to distract people. But I looked at it more seriously, Mr. Speaker. The things that the Prime Minister added on is an admission that the policies are not working, and they're attempting to reverse it, and reverse it in a way in which they're saying to the people, oh, this is what we always wanted to do. But the people know better. And when the day comes that the Prime Minister is brave enough to ring that bell, Mr. Speaker, the people will speak. I thank you very much.